promised to cover the IPCC report, or at least talk about it. And the way I see it, this is, in many ways, this is the deep state in a panic mode, because many smart people have already said a lot of good things about how the report is weak scientifically, and it's underplaying the danger and the risk and the speed of climate change. And I think so that's sort of the how they got it wrong. It's been covered by Professor Wadhams and other people. But I'll try to go into a bit of why they got it wrong. And call me disillusioned or whatever you want, but I tend to think that, 30 years after the climate panel was created, I tend to think that they're not just making casual, stupid mistakes over and over again for 30 years. There's something else going on than, people working for the panel getting it wrong all the time. I don't believe that anymore. I'm sorry. So the deep state wants to keep running this sort of society because of all the benefits for the elite, and so they don't want to put regular people in a panic mode because they want people like you and I to keep doing our thing and keep paying our taxes to them so they can continue their party at the top of civilization. And I must say I'm also a bit disappointed by even great writers from the environmental movement, like James Lovelock, who authored the Gaia Theory, the book about the Gaia Theory. And he's sort of on the same track as the climate panel and the UN. Lovelock wants to build like 100 new nuclear power stations every year for the foreseeable future, in order not to save the planet, but in order to save civilization. So Lovelock wants to save global industrial civilization for whatever it takes, and placing that many 100 new nuclear power stations all around the globe every year. That's sort of his solution in ironic quotes. We now see the IPCC and the deep state behind it, and the big oil that wants to sell oil for as many decades as even possible, trying to sugar the pill and play down the severity of the climate crisis, and basically just keep the wheels going, for whatever time it's possible. So when it comes to saving the biosphere versus saving the human industrial civilization, I come from a different way of thinking than James Lovelock and the climate panel. I come from the Norwegian deep ecology tradition from Arne Næss, a Norwegian professor of philosophy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And central to his philosophy, which he calls deep ecology, is biocentrism. Instead of human centrism, you put the whole living planet, or every living being on the planet, at the center of attention, or at the center of your considerations and your thinking. So if I was forced to choose between saving civilization and saving the biosphere, I would go for the biosphere every time, because humans cannot live in isolation without all the birds and plants and animals and living creatures in the sea and everything. It's like we're not an isolated lab animal that can live on some gel or something from the scientists. We are an integral part of the ecosystems, and so I think all this talk about saving human civilization is just ludicrous. I mean, even the green movement has succumbed to that way of thinking, to Lovelock's way of thinking. Where it's all about us humans. We can just screw the rest and just save this industrial way of living, and save civilization, and then everything will be fine. But it's like, that's actually the reason Ness called his philosophy deep ecology, because his way of thinking is far deeper, where you actually take into account all the other creatures and all other living systems, while the regular green movement is the shallow ecology movement in his thinking. And of course, Ness was only the first Western academic to write down these very common sense ecological principles that have actually been a part of most tribal societies all over the globe. But he's sort of the first Western thinker who formalized it and put it into an academic context and published his works and that kind of thing. So he's not he didn't claim credit for the concept of thinking about the rest of the planet, and that's much older than him. But it's an important contribution to the way the Western world and the academic world thinks about itself. Of course, it's mostly ignored even by the Green parties in most countries, because they still have their loyalty deep inside the machine of the industrial society, and people like Ness and yours truly, who used to be on the same list for the election for the Green Party in my earlier hometown Oslo. We are more like considered what do you call that? Trouble, basically. We're like trouble because we have principles. We believe in conserving the ecosystems and the biosphere, and that's like, that doesn't make for good elections, they believe, in a way. So yeah, so I've covered most of that. To sum up my view about the climate panel and their new report and what they want to do, I think they're just playing the old delaying game, just delaying the inevitable collapse of human civilization, and in order to keep the profit stream coming in for I think they're talking about 12 more years now. So it used to be 10 years back in 1989, but now they say we have 12 more years to to figure out that shit. So yeah, it's just it's just bullshit. I think the best thing in a deep ecology, ecocentric, biocentric way of thinking would be for collapse to happen as swiftly as possible, as soon as possible, for global industrial civilization, in order to stop all the pollution, stop all the toxic flows from factories and toothpaste and whatever stupid thing humans are doing. And I think climate change has wrongly been termed as a problem, while all the time civilization has been the problem, and climate change is the solution. So please subscribe to my channel and tell me what you think about these perspectives in the comments below. Okay, bye.
So when you see this blizzard and this video, you will perhaps immediately think that so winter has come, and that must be why you have so much ice in the fjord, in the sea. But this is one of the big counterintuitive things up here in Greenland, that although you have a sea full of ice, or you have ice floating around in the fjord, this is not sea ice. This is actually land ice from the glacier, the bottom of the Nuuk fjord. And as a matter of fact, I haven't seen a single case of sea ice for all the 15 months I've been in Greenland this far. But there is actually some truth to the point that winter is coming, and therefore you see this beautiful blue ice out in the fjord. And that point is that you have a, let's say, 100 or 150 kilometer long fjord, from all the way from here on the west coast and into the inland ice, where the Greenland ice sheet resides on top. And all of this ice comes from the inland ice sheet, and it all through spring and summer and autumn, it moves out. It calves off the glacier and it moves out towards the ocean, out through the Nuuk fjord. But in spring and early summer, most of the ice actually melts out during its journey through the fjord. So it's actually only now in October that you really get a lot of icebergs floating in the fjord. That's because the ocean water is slightly cooler, so more of the bergs that calve off the glacier can actually survive all the way out to Nuuk, onto this beautiful beach. But as I said, this is not sea ice, this is land ice. And the thing about sea ice is that sea ice is formed on the sea from salt water, more or less salty water. And when these bergs are already out at sea, they are of course counted as sea ice by the satellites and by the computer algorithms, because it's really kind of hard to say where this ice formed originally, and it mixes up with the sea ice also eventually. So I had one day here last February where there was some tendency to form pancake ice on the fjord, but all that was just swept away and melted out the very next morning. So it's like it just doesn't stick, the sea ice up here. So back to the insanely deceptive IPCC report. I mentioned sea ice volume already in the first part, and so amazingly you don't have in the latest UN climate panel report for the 1.5 degrees, you have no mention of the fact that last year, 2017, was the lowest year for sea ice or sea ice volume ever on record. They don't mention that at all, even though sea ice in the Arctic, of course, is a key indicator of how fast we are warming this planet. And of course, I didn't even mention the fact that the year before that, in 2016, we had the lowest year for sea ice extent, which otherwise, extent is otherwise the pet measure, the pet category for the IPCC. Whenever they talk about sea ice, they talk about two-dimensional sea ice extent, because that's not collapsing nowhere as fast as sea ice volume and thickness. But I don't even mention the fact that 2016 was the lowest year for sea ice extent. So over to the more serious failings of the IPCC report, or it's failing, according to what we expect from it, but of course it's not failing according to what their handlers tell them to report about. But this 1.5 degree report, they never tell us in the report itself, or in the summaries or anywhere. And of course they don't tell us in the press, in the popular press, when it's not even in the report. So they never tell us why they come out with this report, or why a limit for 1.5 or 2C is a limit. They seem to have forgotten about that completely. And for those of us who have a memory like an elephant, we can remember more than 1 year back in time, there was a point in time where they would talk about a limit at 1 degree or 1.5 degree or 2 degree Celsius warming since pre-industrial. That was an important tipping point or limit that we should not cross, not just because it will be more flooding and more droughts and more hurricanes, stronger hurricanes and all that, or more sea level rise, but because it's the border between just unpleasant climate change, like too hot in many parts of the world, and a lost cause, a self-reinforcing what's the word for that? A one-way street to a warmer world. They don't talk about that at all. So it's just like they have this UN dog and pony show where they talk about 1.5C, or we should limit our emissions, blah blah, and 1.5 is less severe than 2.0. Duh, of course, but they never go into the fact that if we get to a point more than 1.5 or whatever the scientific number would be, then you will not have a temperature graph for the globe that will peak at some point, flat line, and then go down again afterwards. but you will have a steadily increasing global temperature for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, millennia, and it will go up and up and up until you have no ice at all on the planet. So this this new IPCC report seems to have forgotten, the whole reason for setting an upper limit for temperature increase, and they don't like to talk about climate feedbacks. Like if you get this much warmer, all the ice will go, and that will release methane, and we will go warmer and warmer, and then we will lose all the methane in the permafrost in Siberia and in Canada and in Alaska and in Greenland. They don't like to talk about that because that's unpleasant. So that's why it's deceptive, and you shouldn't really believe anything from the headline of the report to the footnotes. You shouldn't believe anything in that report because they basically just want you to be a little bit worried about the climate and maybe pay a little more for your gasoline, but basically just go about your life. And this is like, this whole climate issue is as important or as unimportant as the question of whether or not you should have free school lunch for children in your local school. And that's sort of where they want to place the whole climate debate. It's unimportant. This will be something for your grandchildren to worry about, and by then they will probably run their cars on palm oil, destroying the rainforest instead. And basically this is, nothing to see here. Move along. All right, that's Talking South for this week, and please subscribe to my channel when you finish watching this. And as I said, next Wednesday, we will have Jennifer Hines, the maker of two big documentary films about the methane monster, or the methane bomb, in our near future. So tune in Wednesday night at about 9 o'clock Greenland time. I can't remember all the other time zones. Okay.
Welcome to Talking South, episode 4 with Torsten Vidal and
Jennifer Hines as our special guest from all the way from Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, and you are in Greenland. How do you say the city that you're living in? Is it Nuuk?
Nuke, like Donald Trump's favorite weapon, you know.
Oh,
So
God.
it's so good to see you, Jennifer.
It's good to
How are
see
you
you
today?
too. I'm doing good. Thank you. I'm doing really good. It's good to be here. Good to be here. There's so much going on, and you know, with all these things unwinding with abrupt climate change and this excessive ice melt in Greenland, it's really good to talk to you today.
Yeah, and you always wanted to be on Talking South, right?
I always wanted to be on Talking South, of course.
So how are you feeling about this new climate report and the IPCC UN stuff? It's been sort of going on and on and on
Yeah,
for 2 weeks.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad that they put it out. This is the most honest they've been. I do believe that it's still way too conservative, but it's strong enough that it caught people's attention. For example, I was talking to my folks and my stepmother said, "Oh, and did you hear about this new report? You know, we have until 2030." And so whatever it is, it's strong enough that people, normal people out there in the world, are taking notice of it. And I think, you know, although it's way too conservative, and I ultimately think that we already have fallen off the cliff to a large
For real.
extent. At least it's an attempt at honesty. What do you think?
Yeah. I've been thinking and blogging and video blogging a lot about it, but after all of that, so the reflection comes in, and so I've kind of gone back to previous IPCC reports in my memories.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite interesting because I found out that it was the fifth IPCC report, the one just before this one. That was in 2014. And when I was reading that, that's sort of when it dawned on me that we had a sense of abrupt climate change that was not in the report. So I read that report with my background as an eco-activist and everything since the 1980s. And then I found out that, oh, this is horrible because they are actually holding back on the feedbacks. They are not talking about the feedbacks and forest fires in the Siberia and in the Amazon and all of these things that are feedbacks that are documented by scientists. Those feedbacks are not, and you are an expert in one of the largest feedbacks, which is the carbon feedback in the Arctic.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my area of focus for sure, but there are feedbacks all over the climate system, and the Arctic is related to everything else. But because it is such, I mean, as goes the Arctic, so goes the world, right?
Yeah, and I also think I heard just the last year, I heard that 3 big systems have started emitting carbon instead of soaking it up. It's the ocean, and it's the forest, and it's the soil itself. So all of those sinks, used to be called sinks because they could draw carbon out of the air. Those have more or less started doing the opposite and giving the carbon back to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's together with everything else going on in the Arctic. So it's
from sinks to source. I mean, it's all over the place, and we're kind of getting to the end of this end game, and it's so odd because it's still so hidden, but you can feel it. I don't know how much time we have left in the Arctic, but I do know that that's the only thing that's keeping our weather systems intact. And let's not mention the vast stores of methane that are deposited.
No, not on this show. This is a family show. So
okay, we won't talk about these things. Pretend like they don't exist.
I'm just kidding. But I remember you said on a show a couple of years ago that you said it's gonna play out, and we're gonna watch it play out. And so that's kind of one of the very strange things about living in 2018, that
Yeah.
we have
I mean,
all the technical means there to watch things play out in real time.
we do, as long as, you know, these sources of data keep intact. I mean, we've seen some sources go missing from time to time. I don't know if have we lost any data sources completely at this point, or anything from like NASA, Earth Sciences? Have any of those data sources gone
Yeah,
offline?
there is one source, because you know deniers often talk about the Greenland ice sheet,
Mm.
and there's a reason they talk about this particularly now, because for 2.5 years the satellite has been down or you know, gone wrong or lost signal or something. So we actually have no data about the ice mass in Greenland at the moment. So that's why they try to fill that gap with deniers and say that it's increasing because we don't have the data that shows either way. You know?
Yeah, it's pretty scary. I mean, the level of just like truth is lies and lies is truth. It's just so like confusing to me. I mean, I almost have like PTSD from the level of deceit. I really do.
Yeah, and you know the P in PTSD can also mean pre.
Oh yeah, for sure. Not post. I mean, it's,
Pre-traumatic.
you know,
Yeah.
or enduring, you know, whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
it's very weird. I just feel that the world is going more and more off the rails, and we're almost entering into some sort of, you know, complicit insanity. It's bizarre, right?
Absolutely. It's like turning on the mainstream news is just like uh, you feel just totally out of it, I think,
Yeah.
if you know about some very, very specific, very dangerous threat,
Well, they
turning on
have
the
to
news
keep
is
the
like,
charade. They have to keep the charade going at this point because of their priorities, and rather than try and have a softer landing, I mean, rather than, you can either smash into the wall at, you know, 250 kilometers an hour, right? That's one style. You can do that. Or you can see the wall coming and you know you're going to smash into it, but maybe by the time you smash into it, you've gotten your speed down to maybe 20 kilometers an hour, or you've tried to do something so you don't have an absolute catastrophe when this hits, because that's unfortunately uh, the vision that I see a little bit, and I hope I'm not like too doomy about it, but it just
no, but
feels, talking
talking
about,
about that, you are kind of the Rachel Carson of the 2000s, because you know she wrote the Silent Spring, and you made two very, very influential documentaries about
yeah,
methane release in the Arctic.
yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, P.S. If you want to host the demise of the Arctic on your site, I have a kind of funny story. So, you know, Methane Monster 2, the demise of the Arctic, the mere 2 hour
Yeah.
and 40-minute, whatever. I don't
Mm.
know what got into me, but whatever it did. That thing's been removed. So, like, you can go and search. You
It's
won't
been
find.
pulled from
It's
YouTube.
gone. It's totally gone.
Wow.
Like, it's hardly, only a couple of people who actually copied it off. So if you, I have the source for it. I've got a copy of it. If you'd like to host it and be the new host of Methane
Absolutely.
Monster
Yeah,
2,
of course.
I'll send it over to you, and you can give it a good replay, Methane Monster 2. But it might be time for Methane Monster 3. I mean, we're kind of getting to that point in life, don't you think?
I think we need a new methane monster every week or every month, because it's
Well,
getting very close.
because we referred to the methane as a potent greenhouse gas, and yes, indeed it is. But did you know that when methane is first emitted, it is 125 times stronger molecule for molecule for a short period of time rather than carbon dioxide. So there's that. There's also the fact that when methane is in its hydrate form and it's encased in its sea ice cage, it is compressed, it is small. The sea ice cage is strong, but it's made of ice. It's an ice crystal palace. And when this ice crystal palace melts, right? It becomes large. So it goes from small to large to the tune of this is 1 and this is 164. So the ratio, so the ratio, I mean, let's put a plug in for the Yamal Peninsula and the methane blowhole craters that are being seen there that are coming up in the Pingo formations. And why are these Pingos? It's like zits. It's a bad case of acne up in the Yamal Peninsula. And it's like, and the reindeer herders that are up there, they see these things when they go off in the night. You know, these things don't go off quietly. They go off with a bang and they burst out. They basically explode the heavy, but it's like this very strong biologic crust kind of, that's been developed, that's there. And then the methane hydrates that are underneath are thawing and thawing and thawing and like pressure and pressure and pressure. And it's just like, and then there's more heat and it goes more and more. And there's all of a sudden there's a little hill. They're like, oh, well, I wonder where that hill came from. It wasn't there before. And then it's like, and it bursts out.
It's even fire in the night, I think.
Fire.
When they blow it, I can see fireballs.
Yeah, fire in the night.
But do you think you could walk us through just briefly, because we started off, or I anyway often start off talking about the ice that is on the top of the planet, and then how do you get from slightly less ice in the sea and to this methane bomb coming up from under the sea?
Yeah. Sure. Well, the Arctic sea ice cover is vital to our life on Earth. That much is clear. When the sea ice is melted, the energy that goes into melting the sea ice from the warmer Arctic, and the warmer Arctic, it's being warmed by coming in through the Barents Sea, through, the Beaufort Sea, from all the rivers, from the ocean itself, and from the top. So it's being really attacked by all sides. And the ice is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. When the Arctic sea ice goes away, the Arctic sea ice will no longer remain at approximately 0 degrees during the summertime, right? I mean, it won't, because the ice will be gone, the buffer will be gone, and it will rapidly start to warm. Once that Arctic sea ice goes, there is no more buffer. And what you will find is that the Arctic Ocean is going to warm rapidly. When the Arctic Ocean warms rapidly, the methane deposits they're already starting to thaw, especially up in the Laptev Sea, the East Siberian Sea, the Lena River Delta is area of high methane, but these deposits are vast and they're large. You can't mine them all up. It's not a problem like that. It's much bigger. And so when the Arctic Ocean is free of ice, it will raise up in temperature very quickly, and the methane deposits that are all laced throughout, especially up in Siberia, will start to go off. And they're on land as well as sea. And this is a feedback, and this is a runaway feedback, and it's interlocked with many, many, many other feedbacks, climate and otherwise. But you'll just see permafrost turning to permamush. You'll see lakes showing up as the land caves in. You'll see the edges of land breaking off, and as the land breaks off, you will see it striped with the pure white methane hydrate that will go directly into the atmosphere. It's there, it's present, it's not a matter of opinion, the vast stores of methane. So that is the danger with the Arctic sea ice melting, and that is why we say that the Arctic sea ice is absolutely a tipping point.
Yep. Because you get more and more sunlight going into the shallow seas when there is no ice on top, and so then you warm up the whole column of water all the way down to the bottom of the shallow seas, and then you gradually thaw up the seabed, and then you get released methane. Okay, we're running up to the hour. Maybe we should, let people.
Yeah, it's been too nerdy, really. This is a lot of information. It's not nice, right? But we have to know about it. So it's been a real pleasure, Torsten. So thank you so much for inviting me on Talking South.
And I would very much
coming
like
here.
to have. Would very much like to have you back, like say in a month or two or whatever,
Sure.
when you feel like it.
Be happy to come in, and we can catch up on the latest developments and see what's up next month. It's fine.
And then we can scare the people who didn't get scared this time. We can scare them next time.
I know. It's not really what I had planned, to be like this horrible fear-mongering person, but
it's good to know. It's better to know than to be left in the dark.
Yeah, it is what it is. But if you want to know, watch this show. If you don't want to know, turn on the TV. That's what I should say.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Signing off. See you next week, Wednesday night. Bye, Jennifer.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Welcome to episode 5 of Talking South. Now, last week's episode was hugely popular and brought the channel all the way up to 1,000 subscribers, mainly due to the wonderful Jennifer Hines, no doubt. So this episode will be a tough one, but here goes. The upcoming singularity will be unlike anything humans have ever faced before. Of course, it wouldn't be much of a singularity if it happened once a week, and we could name a weekday after it, like Singularity Day. And yet, the singularity is with us here today, even many years before it happens. So maybe Singularity Day is not such a bad idea after all. Its tentacles reach back to our day from the near future, and we can feel it. Our coming climate collapse singularity can be defined as occurring when world trade breaks down due to climate change. It can be defined as occurring when your store shuts down for good due to climate change related supply chain issues, or when the last grocery shop in your town closes for good because there is nothing to sell. You get the picture. It's not gonna be nice, it's not gonna be pretty, it's gonna suck. For every generation towards the end, humans learned less from their parents about hunting, fishing, or growing their own food. Precisely when there will be a total and abrupt end to the easy days of easily available foods, we got a generation of humans who know next to nothing about finding our own food. Hell, most of us won't even understand the question. What do you mean finding our own food? So the singularity marks a point in time when the easy days are over, when civilization is over, and when the big bottleneck struggle for survival begins in earnest for billions of human beings. It will cost blood, sweat and tears for sure, but it will also never end. We will already at that point be in an accelerated chain of events that will guarantee an ever faster rate of global warming, a chain that will not be broken until well after the last piece of ice on the planet is melted. No one year or one summer will be like the next one or the previous. Increasingly, finding food and sustenance after the singularity will feel like learning everything over again from scratch every year. We will have to constantly learn from each other, and yes, we will most likely talk more about how to feed ourselves than we've ever done since we descended from the trees. So there'll be a very abrupt shift from the generation that learned the least ever from their parents about feeding ourselves to the next or even the same generation suddenly having to learn more about this than any other generation in the history of Homo sapiens sapiens. We will learn to find food or die trying. And the vast majority of us will of course perish shortly after the singularity. It's just the way of these things. Bye. yeah, I promised to also talk a bit about hope, or what I will choose to call good hope. I noticed there's been some election thing going on in America over the last days, and so to contrast the good hope, I will talk about the bad hope or futile hope. That's the hope everybody is familiar with. I like, say, the Senate in America being dominated by one party, or the House or the Congress being dominated by that party, and sort of the hope that the entire free press is putting into those things is that if that party wins, or that party wins this or that chamber of power, then we will somehow magically stop climate change, or turn the entire apparatus of the industrial war machine around, just like that, just by turning off a switch. And of course, that's not going to happen anytime soon, and it will not happen in these time frames of 2 to 5 years. There's not going to be a total shift in the capitalistic system in such a short time, and you have experts saying that it's too late to make a significant dent in the trend of global warming. It's already a runaway train. It's self-reinforced. You have feedbacks left and right that make sure that it's going to keep warming, whether we choose that political party or not, or whether we start taking the subway or train instead of our car. It's long-term cycles and feedbacks that are already chock full of carbon that's hiding in the ocean for a while and then being released to the atmosphere again, or carbon that's been stored for hundreds of thousands of years in the tundra of Siberia, in the permafrost. All of these things, they don't respect political elections in Europe or America or Australia or anything. It's these are natural processes, and they may be triggered by human industrial civilization, but these days they are already triggered, and they don't need any more triggers from humans to keep going. So sort of the hope connected with this, the good hope, is that we are on a course for civilization collapse, and that means that the war machine, the deep state, and what George Orwell called the perpetual wars, that wars are fought for profit and to keep the population in check. The security state and all of these things are sort of founded on the principle of being at war at any moment. So because we are at war against Oceania or whatever, that means that everybody has to be monitored and controlled by the government, and the deep state wants that sort of system to be in place all the time for its own reasons, to better control their populations. So they wage wars so that their own companies can get the profits from the war industry and from the armament industry and from the aircraft industry and everything. But all of that is going to collapse, of course, together with the industrial civilization. And if you get the kind of feedbacks that are written about in the scientific press, with the carbon in the Arctic, these estimates for a half year of no sea ice in the Arctic are also pretty good estimates for when agricultural crops and whatever feeds human civilization are also going to collapse. So the sea ice is not just some kind of nerdy fascination for one little aspect of the planet, but it's closely connected to our own societies, our civilizations all over the planet. And when the ice collapses, civilization will collapse, will follow very soon, and that's the end of most of the things that good people have been fighting against for so many decades and centuries. That's the end of the war machine. That's the end of all kinds of, oppression and torture and So even though the years after the civilization collapse are not going to be a walk in the park, to put it mildly, at least we won't have all of these senseless wars. We won't have drone strikes killing everybody at weddings. We won't have torture and governments prying into everything we do. So I think, given the choice we have of things to be hopeful about and things that are even remotely possible to come true, I think this hope is, to be quite honest, it's the only hope we can offer. And do tell me what you think about this little rant and what you sort of hope you can see yourself. And I'm hoping to be able to invite to a conversation so that we together can find out what things are meaningless to hope about and what things are at least, possible. They may come true, and it won't be a perfect, easy, or very pleasant world, but it will be a new world anyway. So, okay, bye. I don't know, guys. Sometimes you just feel so old, I guess. Today I checked my phone before I went out of bed, and I saw this update from the guys in England, the Extinction Rebellion, and they had hung a banner with a 4-word slogan from a bridge in London. And I was like, so even even though the message on the banner was kind of, dire, or call it correct or whatever you want, but it wasn't the banner itself or the message that made me launch into a pretty sad, pretty heavy day to get through. Actually, It was the very fact that Extinction Rebellion, you know, after everything they've been drumming up for and everything they've been telling people or giving people some kind of hope about what they were gonna do, and what they end up doing is like spray painting a couple of windows and hanging a stupid banner from a bridge. I mean, come on. So it launches into what I talked about last week with good hope versus false hope, and you know, the jury is still out for Extinction Rebellion, but it weighs heavily in the direction of false hope, I guess. And in my native tongue, Norwegian, we have a word for this. This translates to hope broken, to be hope broken. And that's sort of the state you will constantly be in if you jump onto these many different false hopes that they throw at you, you know, society or the elite or media or whatever. So if you believe in any of the false hopes, like that this Extinction Rebellion is going to change anything, you know, anything significant, even in London or Bristol or England, that they are the saviors of the planet. I mean, man, you are opening up a world of hurt. Because, you know, it's because the hope is already false. You know, you can never be satisfied by the results, because, you know, what you believe in is what you get or whatever. So what's the problem with this Extinction Rebellion? Well, it's basically that I apply the softest tools in the box. They apply civil disobedience, which is okay if you want to, you know, like close a road for traffic to protect the kids living in that road, or something, you know, minor like that. It's okay for let's say just ordinary political struggles, you know, like we want the right to marry men even though we are men ourselves or whatever. Social struggles that you want to shine a light on, things that are much easier to achieve than saving a fucking planet. You know, so they are basically playing with open cards. You know, everything Extinction Rebellion does is like transparent and in the open, and no secrets, very few secrets, and everybody is showing their face and taking their sentences, and yeah, basically playing fair by the media and the politicians and the police. And basically they are they are sitting there with their hat in their hand and asking the power elites to please stop fracking, please stop exploring for fossil fuels, please stop destroying the planet, because we would really like you to stop doing it, okay? And the other side here, I'm pretty sure they're just laughing at these naive hippie eco activist types, because they will go to jail, they will get fines, and everybody will forget about them before Christmas, more or less. So, yeah. I don't know. It's just that I've been sort of waiting for, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 decades for any movement to do anything to challenge the status quo about the climate and the environment. And there's been nothing. I mean, at least since the mid-90s. There's been less and less and almost nothing. Nothing that was big enough or ambitious enough or radical enough or direct action enough. So when this British initiative comes up, it's like, yeah, I never really believed in it, but tiny part of me still maybe did, and so it's really, really disappointing to see them, spray paint the window of one of the ministries in London and then hang their stupid banner about climate change from a bridge. And it's like, what do you guys really think that is going to accomplish? Yeah, so I don't know. We'll have to give them a couple more weeks and see if anything comes out of it, but I really, really doubt this is anything other than a tiny little ripple on the ocean of the climate catastrophe. So, something I forgot to mention or mention enough last week was the part of the good hope for beyond civilization, for after civilization, when it collapses. That, of course, the rest of the living planet will have some kind of chance to recover or grow back or recolonize the urban areas or the dead zones that humans have caused. And so a large part of the good hope resides with simply giving the entire planet back to all the other species, plants and animals and fish and moss and viruses and fungi and whatever. So it's an abrupt end to human civilization, but with, of course, some brave humans making it to the other side, but in a much smaller quantity and with much lower danger to the rest of the planet from those neo-uncivilized hunter-gatherers or whatever we are going to be. So a new chance for the planet to grow back, basically. However hard that will be, but it's a multitude of species, and some species that are living in warm areas now may maybe be able to colonize higher altitudes or areas closer to the poles. So I think there is a certain amount of fair hope in that. Okay,